The most dangerous phrase in the data center today is private cloud. Not because the technology is hard, but because everyone in the room thinks it means something different. We pour millions into exuberant visions and high-speed hardware only to realize we've built a foundation for an apartment complex where we actually need a single-family home. James Harless knows that if you haven't defined the outcome, you aren't building a cloud, you're just buying expensive furniture for a house that doesn't fit. I'm Robb Boyd, and this is WWT Presents Research. We're moving into priority 2 of our data center series, Private Cloud. In our first episode, we looked at the massive wave of infrastructure refresh, the reality that even without the pressure of AI, most data centers are simply hitting their expiration date. But once you commit to that refresh, you're faced with a much bigger decision. What kind of environment are you actually building on top of it? And that's where the private cloud conversation gets complicated. It's not just a product you buy, it's an operating model you choose. And as James Harless explains, the gap between what people call a cloud and what they actually need is where the most expensive mistakes happen. James leads the virtualization and container platforms team here at WWT. He helps organizations navigate the journey from initial strategy through implementation, and he sees exactly what happens when you try to shortcut the hard thinking at the beginning. The first thing James does when a customer says they want private cloud is to start asking some clarifying questions, because that term covers an enormous range of outcomes, and most organizations haven't figured out which ones they're actually targeting.
The way that I think about this, it's contextual a lot of times in what a customer says about private cloud, what they're thinking. But the real point is that private cloud is a whole spectrum of outcomes. And I like to think of it at the very far left of a graph, if you could imagine a kind of a maturity curve. On the very far left, you'd have private cloud with a lowercase p and a lowercase c. And this is really just anything that I host in my own data center or that I pay a colo to host for me. It's on premises, it's under my control, and it's most likely virtualized. That's typically where we kind of start to see the early definitions of private cloud.
Well, they changed the P from public to private, but the cloud part is still more aspirational than operational. As the idea matures, and it does within every organization, the conversation starts moving toward the other end of that spectrum.
But on the far extreme right-hand side of this maturity curve is a capital P, capital C private cloud. And that is a service-oriented infrastructure that's delivered on premises in a similar fashion to how a public hyperscaler would deliver their cloud services. So this means it has to have the attributes of a cloud, which means elasticity, it means on demand, it means cost transparency, it means cloud operating model from a consumption and a delivery perspective. So this is much more sophisticated and has very little to do with what software or hardware is part of that.
When someone says they want AWS type functionality in their private cloud, they might think they're describing the left side of that spectrum with better automation. What they're actually asking for is the right side, a complete transformation of how IT operates and how the business interacts with IT.
That's something where we need the business to really buy into that, because we're not just talking about changing something about IT. We're talking about changing how the business interacts with IT. When they interact with AWS, they know they swipe their credit card, and if they have a problem with their database, there's nobody to call. They go to their dashboards, they try to figure out what the region availability is, but you can't call AWS and say, help me troubleshoot this problem. And that's has to be that way because that's part of AWS's cost model, right?
Yeah.
They know they don't have the staff to answer the phone from 100,000 customers. And that's a kind of a model you have to get into with delivering cloud services. You have to get into shared responsibility where, hey, my responsibility stops here and it cleanly picks up from here and it becomes your responsibility.
The call a friend culture of traditional IT doesn't scale in a cloud model. It's a massive cultural shift, and organizations are being pushed toward it by factors that go way beyond just, better tech.
What's really driving it today are a combination of factors like data governance. So particularly in certain markets, I might need to deliver those kind of cloud services, but because of some law or some, company policy or government entity policy, I cannot put my data in a public cloud. So I have to recreate that. And the other idea is just data proximity. So in some cases, I need to do processing of that data somewhere very close to where that data is collected.
Data sovereignty and performance are well understood drivers, but James sees a third factor becoming increasingly common, one that's harder to talk about openly.
We've seen moves where software licenses or parts of the market have just dramatically increased their pricing for one reason or another. But it really comes down to monopoly position and their ability to do that because they have this strong position inside the customer base. And so you're not necessarily insulated from that in public cloud. It is something that is top of mind for some customers. Like, hey, we saw it over here. Why couldn't this other company who essentially I depend on 100% just decide tomorrow that the prices are 50% more than they were yesterday? Because I would have to pay it, right? If that came about. There's no other option.
Lock-in risk creates a sense of urgency that, without a clear destination, triggers the exact failure pattern James warns about.
And this is the biggest danger of private cloud projects. Most of them die, and most of them die because of scope creep. We want to deliver 10 services, and we want to do that within a specific time frame. But because service isn't really defined, right? A service can be a thing that's very simple, like deliver a virtual machine, or it can be very complicated, like deliver this full application stack with backed up copies of the data from production and lots of outcomes. How someone hears the word service is very different between two different people with two different perspectives on the project.
You get 20 people in a room and you've got 20 different mental images of what's being built. You think you can just iterate your way to a consensus, but as James points out, that's like trying to change the blueprint while the concrete is drying.
I have a couple of different analogies that I use. And the idea is that I'm building a house, just a house, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom type of thing. And I can add on to that design as long as I don't deviate too much. Like I can add a garage later and that's fine. But if I decide after I've laid the foundation down that, what I actually need is a multi-unit, multi-family dwelling that will house 50 families. I have to start all over, right? I need to back up. I got to demolish that concrete. I need a whole new set of designs. Like I can't come at this thinking that I can grow from a single family unit to an apartment building, just by organically building rooms onto that building.
Can you turn a house into an apartment complex after the foundation is poured? No. But in the heat of a project, under the pressure of a deadline, people try to do it anyway.
We worked with a customer a while back, and it started off as very ambitious, and it started off with, hey, we want to deliver services from Amazon, and we think that if we have these 15 services that we'll spend less money with Amazon and we'll save money, and which is probably true, and it's a noble goal. But very quickly it pivoted towards, we have budget inside of this quarter and we need to buy some hardware right now. Immediately, it just starts to deviate, because what you have to do is you have to stop and identify these services, be very clear about them, make sure the business aligns with you, because they want to consume those, or they're willing to consume those services from your private cloud. So it turned into buy some hardware, then try to hurry up and get that installed, and then try to retroactively fit the thing back on there. But we could never quite get alignment again. And it kind of turned back into a much lower, much less ambitious project, because that's what essentially happens.
It's a classic trap. Budget urgency wins. The concrete sets, and suddenly you're locked into a foundation that doesn't fit the vision. To James, avoiding that mess requires a specific kind of discipline, one that starts with a simple litmus test for the C-suite.
If you're describing your cloud to me and it sounds very, epic, or it sounds very exciting, what the possibilities are, and we talk about, hey, we're going to need to build a charter committee. We're going to need a steering committee to essentially lay down a charter for this overall effort so that the business and IT are aligned on what this outcome is. If this doesn't sound like something that's reasonable, then we got to scale it back to something that IT can accomplish. If we're not willing to engage the other side of this, then we can't assume that they're just going to want to come in and move into our apartment building.
If a leadership team won't commit to a steering committee or a charter, they've already given you their answer. They aren't actually looking for a transformation. They're just looking for a project.
I don't have business alignment. I don't have a sponsor on the business side, or I don't have executive alignment to help build this thing. Then that can tell us, okay, what we're working with is something that will never be an apartment building, but it might be a very large house.
And that is a valid outcome. Not every organization needs capital P private cloud, but you need to know which you're building before you break ground. The charter isn't just documentation, it's scope protection.
So essentially, we're talking about a document that's created from a steering committee that's a combination of technical and business leaders. It talks about what are we trying to accomplish, why are we trying to accomplish this, and what are the agreed upon kind of functions and outcomes. This serves as a maybe a high level blueprint for the ultimate design pattern we're going to have later. But from a charter perspective, in terms of the steering committee, they're laying down how does the business intend to interact with this? What are the kind of guidelines that we're going to use inside here? What kinds of services are the business looking to consume from this versus what they would get from public cloud? And it's really just a framework to kind of establish the ground rules.
Think of the charter as a North Star that sits above the technical grain. When scope creep inevitably shows up, the team finally has a shield. They can point to the charter and say, hey, that's not what we agreed to build.
One of the challenges the steering committee will have is not understanding necessarily what's possible, because you have a group of business people who aren't technical. They're not really exposed to the market. You have a group of IT people. They're very familiar with what's possible today in their on-premises environment, but maybe not the broader context, what is possible. So hopefully we're on the steering committee and we're helping them. We as in WWT are helping them write that charter, and that'll get them off on a good foot right out of the gate, right? Help them build that. We may even be the ones trying to help them align who needs to be on that charter, because really we want executive sponsorship. We want key sponsorship from the business units who are going to consume these services, and then we want technical leadership.
WWT sees this journey from every angle, from the boardroom strategy down to the engineers racking the gear. But even with that bird's eye view, James sees one more trap that's, well, it's kind of tempting, precisely because it looks like a shortcut.
Hey, I'll just have a managed service provider do this stuff for me. And I won't necessarily have to build all this automation or build these services. I'll just pay someone to do this thing on my team's behalf. But it doesn't end up where you would hope. It's never going to emulate public cloud, because the services aren't going to be delivered in this automated, scalable fashion. And every time you need to build another rack of equipment, you're going to get a bill for that amount of, it's not a self-funding vehicle, right? Where, hey, somebody put in $100 and that allows me to buy $90 of new gear type of thing. That's the normal kind of cloud operating model. Amazon doesn't have to go and approach its customers and say, hey, we need to build a new data center. I need each one of you to chip in.
But it's not just the lopsided economics that'll get you. It's the hidden manual labor.
When you abstract it behind a managed service provider, you're still using manual processes most of the time. They're going to automate to some degree, but labor's cheap in some parts of the world, and so they're gonna just abstract away the labor to low cost people doing manual tasks. So it takes a while. It's not automated. It's never going to deliver you exactly what you want. And there's going to be this, okay, you tell this person what you want, and then they'll tell this person, and then that person will tell this person, sort of thing.
James Harless watches well-resourced, technically capable organizations fail at private cloud constantly, not because they lack talent, because they start building before they know what they're building. The apartment complex, that turns out to be a house. The house, someone decides should be an apartment complex after the concrete is poured. The manufacturing company that bought hardware in a budget sprint and then tried to fit a vision around a foundation that it couldn't support. Every one of those stories starts the same way: urgency substituted for clarity. The fix James describes isn't complicated, but it requires discipline that's harder than it sounds. Before you buy anything, before you architect anything, get business and technical leadership in the same room. Write a charter that defines what you're building, why, and how the business will consume it. Use that document as your scope protection. When someone tries to expand the project beyond what you agreed to build, you've got something to point to. A charter is not going to solve every problem, but it ensures that the most expensive conversations happen while you can still change the design, not after the concrete is already poured. It's the same dynamic Eric DeLallo described in the very first episode. The difference between organizations that are curious and those that are rushed. Budget urgency is the most reliable way to skip the thinking that matters most. The Data Center Priorities research from WWT is at WWT.com. Private Cloud is Priority 2, and the research walks through the full adoption framework from assessing IT maturity through building the platform that makes it sustainable. I'm Robb Boyd. Thanks for watching.